Good or Bad 2. A sequel to Good News for the Alpha Gen. How we help the student and their teacher. International Teacher Training and Development College. LD003B. Good or Bad, a sequel to Good News for the Alpha Gen by Leslie Simonfalvi, Director, International Teacher Training and Development College. leslie.simonfalvi@aol.com. Write Alpha in the subject line. I want to dedicate this book to all the LD students, including members of the Alpha Gen, I have been teaching over the years and decades, and also to their parents who have been most helpful. I could have given this book the subtitled How to Avoid Becoming a Member of the Alpha Generation, because we, parents and teachers, can only help the child if we realize that there is a potential problem, how that potential problem would change the life of that child, and how it would become an inseparable part of their life. In our learning, teaching, and teacher training, we follow the communicative approach to the language, the humanistic, person-centered approach to people, the socio-psychodynamics approach to groups, the total quality approach to educational management, and the principles of the 6-category intervention analysis in interpersonal relationships. Because of the above, we do not think that language should be taught and learnt as a set of dogmata, rather it is a living creature that can be enjoyed and that can give a great deal of joy to all concerned. We believe in joyful learning, home joy, joyful teaching that is a helping profession, and joyful teacher training that is the best orientation for a meaningful professional life. We believe in a synergy between vertical learning from a teacher, horizontal learning between students, and diagonal learning between teacher trainees and students. We believe that learning groups are not born simply by herding people together into one container, rather learning groups have to be made with a great deal of concerted work, have to be continually developed, and have to be appreciated by all concerned. We believe that we can learn, teach, and train best in a warm, accepting and welcoming environment where we appreciate contents and embrace persons, rather than the other way round. We believe that learning and development are lifelong and there is no need to press them if they are joyful. A very important note, in the materials that follow, I do not want to tell you how to feel and what to think. Instead, I am simply sharing with you some of the insights, ideas, and skills that have accumulated over the years and decades. If you read this material, and agree with me at some points, it doesn't necessarily mean that I am right. We both may be wrong. By the same token, if you don't agree with me at some other points, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm wrong. We both might be right. I've been right or wrong so many times that I reserve the right to be wrong. Contents, I didn't break up the contents of this book into chapters since every point is related to every other points. You can best imagine it as a 3D cobweb. The bulk of the material was written for, and presented at World Council for Curriculum and Instruction 2010 Conference 11-17 July, University of Pécs, Hungary, in 2 × 90 minutes, with 16 participants in each workshop. It was in 2010, the beginning of what demographers call the Alpha Generation. Now, 15 years later, at the end of the Alpha Gen period, I look back and reflect on it, and also add whatever I have learnt ever since. I do not want to suggest that we learn, or should learn, a foreign language or a second language in the way we learned the mother tongue as babies. However, almost 100% of language teaching in the world is done by, for that, untrained mothers. If first language teaching were left to existing schools and the existing system of education, human languages, and with that the human race, would most probably soon die out. How can an untrained mother be a great deal more effective than most of the language teachers after long years of teacher training? Good question. Frequently asked question, how can an untrained mother be a great deal more effective than most of the language teachers after long years of teacher training? Leslie, there are several important factors, but by far the most important among them is that the human genome contains the genetic code for the capacity for hearing and speaking all human speech sounds. It means that all able-bodied human babies can learn the mother tongue. It is not coded in the genes of the mother, but in the genes of the baby. The mother's genes may be important for the willingness to speak to the baby, and in the quality of speech she provides to the baby. Question: what is the next? Leslie, it is partly philosophical and partly practical, situational, and it also applies to learning a foreign language or a second language later. When we learn the mother tongue, there is no other language to turn to, neither for translation to the mother tongue for understanding, nor from the mother tongue for communication with the human environment, ND. We call this type of learning acquisition. When we learn a second language in a language environment where it is spoken as the mother tongue, it is relatively easy to create the ideal situation for acquisition. When we learn a foreign language in a language environment where our first language is spoken as the mother tongue, it is very difficult, almost impossible to create an ideal situation for acquisition. Question: at university, we learnt Stephen Krashen's theories, and the acquisition theory among them. It was a foreign language teaching and learning environment, still we called it the acquisition theory. Leslie, it is wrong. It's all wrong. Quite a few trainers and trainees, and the theoreticians before them, imagine that we teach by following theories. I think it is the other way round. Successful teaching proves or disproves the theories. The next important factor is that learning acquiring the mother tongue is all based on the oracy skills, that is on listening and speaking. The visual aids are there to make the sons understandable, and the repetition in speech to turn it into a skill. The literacy skills, that is reading and writing, have no role to play. Question: what comes next? Leslie, here come the next, and the last I want to mention here. When we learn the mother tongue, everything is concrete, and nothing is abstract. Everything can be demonstrated and pointed at, and it makes understanding easy and clear. It is like that in the first 3 years of learning the mother tongue, and the abstract starts to come in during the 3 to 7 years of learning. Then it is absolutely necessary because the number concept is fully abstract, and even more the step when letters start to replace the sounds. Question: can we just go back to reading and writing for a second? Almost all foreign language teaching and learning is based on books and reading and writing. Leslie, it is true, and the result is a very low level of efficiency. Question: what is, then, the way out? Lelsey, I don't want to give a tip to anyone, I'm only telling what we are doing. Imagine a good book, with a student's book, a workbook, a test book, and a CD. In most groups, the name of the game is learning English, and the aim of the game is leaning the student's book and supplement it with the workbook, the test book, and, sometimes, with the CD. In my group, the name of the game is learning English, and the aim of the game is to fully understand the whole content of the CD, and to use much of it as a reflex act, and supplement them, as needed, with the student's book, the workbook, and the test book. Language is primarily speech, that is why we call it a tongue. How can an untrained mother be a great deal more effective than most of the language teachers after long years of teacher training? Good question. The answer to this question lies partly in what the 4 agents, that is mother and child, and teacher and student do, and partly in what they do not do. We will label them as good and bad, with only one exception: the baby is necessarily good. Question: tell me more about the 4 agents. Leslie, we'll talk about the in details on the next few pages. However, there are a few extra points we have to mention here. It doesn't make sense to sense and assess these 4 agents one by one, it is better to sense them and assess them in their relationships. States and tendencies are equally important. States are there for measurement and statistics, tendencies tell us about development or deterioration. In humanistic psychology, Abraham Maslow wrote about being, one of the 3 prongs of ancient Greek philosophy of knowledge, while Carl Rogers dealt with the second prong, becoming. The third prong is not being, and it is not dealt with in humanistic psychology and the person-centered approach. The mother-baby relationship is probably the most intimate of all human relationships. It is important to stress that a newbie PRN baby is necessarily good. The teacher-student relationship is between the trained and paid teacher and the untrained and paying student, and it is also totally asymmetrical from the language's point of view. The teacher uses a very different language to address the student from the language the student can address the teacher. It is important to stress here, if the teacher is bad, we cannot tell whether the student is good or bad. A good mother gives her child motherly love. In a humanistic, person-centered approach, we call it unconditional positive regard. A good mother accepts herself and loves herself, too. In a humanistic, person-centered approach, we call it unconditional positive self-regard. This is the very basis of her motherly love, or unconditional positive regard. Without this, her love is felt like sacrifice, and the child, over the years, learns that being a mother equals being a martyr. It is not either or. It is first herself, and then the child, and love is not quantifiable. Question: what is unconditional positive regard? Leslie, it is one of Carl Rogers' 6 criteria of a helping relationship. The other 5 criteria are: 1. Psychological contact. We, the potential helpee and the potential helper. 2. The person who needs help is incongruent. 3. The person who is a potential helper is congruent, for the helper gives unconditional positive regard to the helpee. 5. The helper feels empathy with the helpee's state. 6. Communication between the helpee and the helper about all the other 5 criteria. Erich Fromm calls it motherly love in his book The Art of Loving. Question: loves herself sounds strange or negative in some cultures. Leslie, it may, although it is absolutely necessary if she doesn't love herself at the expense to the baby. Unconditional positive self-regard is a precondition to unconditional positive regard. Question: it was an aha moment for me to realize that the mother with a healthy amount of self-love is a role model to the baby of the child. Leslie, I agree. The baby and the child's ego should shrink to a healthy amount, rather than to 0. Question: what is the meaning of love is not quantifiable? Leslie, love doesn't follow the laws of conservation, that is the conservation of matter, the conservation of energy, and the conservation of inertia. It means that the more love you give to others, for example your baby, the more will remain to yourself. Question: how can we understand wants and needs nowadays, in the context of the Alpha Gen? I mean wants and needs related to learning the mother tongue. Leslie, the baby's needs are independent from generations, including the Alpha generation, since they are born as members of the human race, rather than members of the Alpha Gen. The influences of their human and technical environment make them members of the Alpha Gen. The needs of the baby the learning of the mother tongue is to have a human environment, including the mother, who speak to them as much as possible, and listens to them as much as possible. The baby's needs are learning the mother tongue as well as possible, and through that learning as much of the world as possible, and it is a question of survival. The needs of the mother teaching the mother tongue to the baby, and to have a fast-developing baby, with whom communication is easier day after day. The wants of the mother teaching the mother tongue to the baby is to find some relaxation amidst a very important, extremely tiring, and very satisfying job, if we do it well, by finding a good enough and dependable caretaker, and a safe pacifier sometimes. A bad mother cannot give her child motherly love for either of 2 reasons: 1 because she doesn't love herself enough, or 2 because she loves herself too much. A mother may give her child fatherly love, which is perfectly all right in a one-parent family where one parent should give simultaneously motherly love and fatherly love. It may not be all right in a 2-parent family where the child may feel the reversal of roles and the parents are bad role models. Fatherly love is not unconditional positive regard since it sets conditions and it demands efforts and measurable results. Question: it is very interesting to find the upper and the lower limits of self-love. Leslie, it is not really like heaven and hell, it is more like a delicate balance between 2 limits. The baby is born with a very strong ego, and as he grows up, part of it will be replaced by either empathy, if the mother and other members of their human environment do it well, or by pain, or loss in self-appreciation, or confidence if they don't. Empathy takes a long time to learn and it can only be learnt in an empathic environment. Question: you also mention fatherly love here. Leslie, it is also mentioned in Erich Fromm's book The Art of Loving. The father sets conditions the child must keep to, and demands efforts and measurable results. Its importance is made even more clear when one person must provide them both in a one-parent family. Question: it must be very difficult. Leslie, I couldn't agree more. I have direct personal experience since I had to bring up my 2 children alone. The key is to have a very good relationship and very clear communication with the child or children. A child can and will learn how to receive the motherly love and the fatherly love simultaneously and will not love one parent or the other to the severe detriment of all concerned. As a result of receiving motherly love, that is unconditional positive regard, the child will develop unconditional positive self-regard, and this is an absolute precondition of ever becoming a helper, or a mate, or a partner. As a result of receiving fatherly love, that is conditional positive result, the child will learn how to perform well, both is a society of helpers and helpees around, and how to take responsibility autonomously. Question: in some families, the child hides behind the mother to avoid the father's influence, and with this, the expected performance. Leslie, that's why proper communication and transparency is absolutely necessary. If this is missing, the child turns foxy and lacks development. Question: it is very interesting to see the relationship between unconditional positive regard and unconditional positive self-regard. Leslie, in a good case, it is really a sandwich. The child first recognizes mother's and/or father's unconditional positive self-regard, that is the healthy amount of loving themselves, then feels the parent's unconditional positive regard towards the child, and ultimately the child develops unconditional self-regard, that is the healthy amount of loving themselves. When a parent gives fatherly love, that is conditional positive regard, it is very important for them to perform well according to TGA same rules, and under the same conditions they set to the child. Without this, the parent is incongruent, and they teach incongruence to the child. If the conditions and standards are set badly, the child may not want to grow up, that is wants to be a child forever, without ever taking the responsibilities of an adult, or may not want to be a child, that is wants to be an adult, and wants to have the rights of an adult without developing into adulthood, and without having adult qualities. Question: as QA teacher, I have met quite a few children who don't sense the parent, especially the father, as congruent, that is a person who would do whatever they want their child to do. Leslie, congruence, as another criterion from the 6 criteria of a helping relationship, is absolutely necessary. An incongruent father will become a role model for the child. Question: I also have examples of children who don't want to grow up, as well as children who don't want to be children and want to be treated as adults, without having developed adult qualities. Leslie, I think it is the full responsibility of the parents, and it must be avoided. Question: how can we see the needs and wants for the Alpha Gen mother and the Alpha Gen child? Leslie, the need of the child, and let's not call them Alpha Gen as yet, is to learn the mother tongue 24/7 365 undisturbed for at least 3 years, and after that, at the age of 3 to 7, to continue learning the mother tongue, and to learn good manners and communication skills with strangers and with adults, to develop social intelligence and emotional intelligence and empathy. This need is often seriously violated by the parents' wants, who want to be free to ride their own hobby horse, by giving the child gadgets too early and without a real aim. And this is when the child starts to become a member of the Alpha generation. There is a chance that these parents don't realize what they are causing, and it is high time to tell them clear as daylight. A good teacher can give the student fatherly love, that is conditional positive regard. A good teacher can set conditions and can demand efforts and measurable results if they are congruent and if their own performance is obviously high. A good student can receive the demands and make efforts and produce measurable efforts if they can feel the positive regard behind the conditions. A good student frequently has a role model among their good teachers. A good student frequently chooses the subject of the role model teacher for further study. Question: does motherly love, that is unconditional positive regard, make sense in teacher-student relationships? Leslie, it is not too common. Booty tea is not impossible either in special contexts, such as in kindergarten teaching, in T1 for grades of primary school teaching, in teaching the LD student, in teaching the physically handicapped, in teaching the blind and the hard at hearing student, or teaching dropout students at the point of entry. Most of these need well-selected and specially trained teachers to make the social relationships. Question: it is clear, but why just at the point of entry for the drop-out students? Leslie, we let them in unconditionally, but once they are in and feel safe after being rejected in earlier learning adventures, we tell them clearly that they cannot be the same at the point of exit, which means the need for development, that is fatherly love, or conditional positive regard. Question: the love element is not always there in teaching. What can take its place? Leslie, expertise or power. Many teachers don't teach the student. They teach the subject. In teacher training, when I further trained existing teachers, I heard it many times: I love teaching. What I hate is the students. Many universities, and many teacher training departments at universities, are not interested in taking and training the teacher type. They are rarely interested in the social intelligence, in the emotional intelligence, in the interpersonal intelligence, or in the intrapersonal intelligence of the applicants. They are only interested in the IQ, and they want to train teachers who care and share, who love the students rather than just the subject. Subjects are fine, they don't need caring and sharing, and empathy. Students do. Question: earlier you mentioned congruence. Leslie: yes. For fatherly love, it is absolutely necessary for the teacher to set aims, prescribe measurable results, and perform well in all there before prescribing the same for and demanding the same from students. If they do, they are congruent. If they don't, they are incongruent, and students feel it and they are very sensitive to it. The bad teacher can't give the student fatherly love, that is conditional positive regard, and that is the reason why we can't tell whether the student is good or bad. The bad teacher's slogan is something like that: if you know it well, I'm a very good teacher. If you don't know it well, you are a very bad student. Send your daddy in. The bad teacher doesn't want to teach. They want the student to know. A bad teacher is a cheater. A bad teacher can very easily attracted by sugar-coated methods. They will be the seller. A bad student doesn't want to learn. They want to know and buy the sugar coating. Question: if there is no motherly love, and no fatherly love either, the reason behind these may be that there is no love. As you said it before, if the love is missing, there is often expertise or power as the driving force in teaching. Leslie: there is nothing wrong with expertise since we need it if we want to tell the truth. The question is whether we want to teach the subject or the student. In a humanistic, person-centered setting, the student is not the object of the teacher's teaching. They are the subject of their own learning. The problem with power is that it is easily misused or abused, and then it often creates anger or fright, and either of these would exclude joyful learning. It is important to stress if the teacher is bad, we cannot tell whether the student is good or bad. Question: you mentioned the asymmetry between teacher and student. How does it affect the teaching? Leslie: it comes very clear if we ask and answer a few questions. What do we test when we test? The teaching? The learning? Both the teaching and the learning? Neither of the teaching nor the learning? Do we really test the stress we cause? Teaching is most often done in a monologue style, and we know that it is not very effective. Will testing in a monologue style be effective? Question: what are sugar-coated methods? Leslie: you know when they promise to learn English in 2 weeks, if you pay a lot. Anything that promises results without time and effort. Question: what is the relevance of this to the Alpha Gen? Leslie: many children who have become members of the Alpha generation don't readily memorize NAD, because of that, they have a shorter than normal memory. The bad teacher doesn't realize this and tests only the short-term memory, although students need whatever they have learnt for long periods. Question: what should they do? Leslie: do the test, grade it, and then do it again 2 or 4 weeks later, and grade it again, and you'll see the difference. The result will show the importance of memorizing. A good mother talks to the child a great deal without wanting anything immediately back. Language is music, a love song to the child. A bad mother doesn't talk to her child enough for a developing complex language awareness. When she does, she talks to her child in solo words rather than in chains of words. Solo words are more difficult for the child to understand. A child is a very fast learner for listening comprehension and very slow in learning words, only 1 word per day for the first 18 months. At the age of 18 months, the speed changes to approximately 10 words per day. Question: when I went to school, my teachers often told me not to sing when I speak, and I got used to not singing. How could I sing to my baby if I can't sing to my family, my schoolmates, or to myself? Leslie: singing is absolutely necessary if you want to say something. Besides the words, that is the linguistic features, there are paralinguistic features as well, that is the tune or melody, the pitch, that is how high, the volume, that is how loud, the voice range, that is how many octaves, the pace, that is how fast, the word stress, which syllable is more important than others, and the sentence stress, which word is more important than others. The baby can sense them all, but first they can understand the paralinguistic features and the words need more repetitions or meetings. They know it is mother, they are not left alone, they are safe, food is coming, cleaning is coming, etc. All these are communicated through singing. Question: you mentioned solo words for the bad mother. What's wrong with that? Leslie, solo words miss many of the paralinguistic features, so they are more difficult for the baby to catch and understand. They are very fast in learning the music, but very slow in learning the words. A good teacher talks to their student a great deal and helps the listening comprehension by all means. The primary learning outcome is language awareness. The bad teacher thinks that the language is made up of words and overloads the student with isolated lexical items. A good student fills part of their life with the sounds of the language and they are very patient with all other aspects of learning. A bad student has never heard of one of the most important laws of Gestalty: the whole is different from the sum of the parts, the meaning of the sentence is different from the meanings of the words in the sentence. Question: how can a good teacher help the listening comprehension? Leslie, the primary learning outcome is language awareness, that is phonologiac awareness, text awareness, syntactic awareness, intonational awareness, grammatical awareness, gist listening skill, gist reading skill, time awareness, developing emotional intelligence, developing social intelligence, developing empathic understanding, developing questioning techniques, developing explanatory vocabulary. All these together is what Vygotsky, a Belarusian psychologist, called zone of proximal development, ZPD, about 100 years ago. ZPD is what the student can do together with a proper helper, as compared to doing it alone. When the good teacher and the student do all these, they turn the noise into data, and the data into information. Students cannot understand noise, and they may know but cannot understand data, either. The first level of understanding is information. Question, again, what is wrong with solo words? Leslie, the bad teacher tells the student to write out the words, that is, take the words out of the context where they have one meaning and without the context they have multiple meanings. The student can easily learn all the words in their context, but isolated words overload the student and cause information anxiety. Question, what makes the main difference between the bad student and the good student? Leslie, the bad student wants to go on a very narrow, rough path from the decontextualized literacy skills, that is reading and writing, towards the oracy skills, that is listening and speaking, and it is an almost impossible task. The good student wants to go on a well-paved avenue of the oracy skills, where everything is contextualized in natural collocations, towards the literacy skills, where their inner monologue, that is a positive byproduct of the listening skills, provides them with the necessary context. The Gestalt law that is mentioned here is very general, and it is the basis of every synergic compound. A good mother tirelessly repeats very simple language elements to the child. These repetitive elements will make the language less frightening and the context more easily recognizable for the child. The bad mother may make two grave mistakes when using the language with the child. She either uses oversimplified, broken language that stops the language development, or she may use abstract concepts in her speech that make the comprehension difficult or slower than usual. The child happily recognizes what they know and never seems to be bored by the same tale, or the same song, or the same video if the adult seems to enjoy it, too. Question, where is the stress in tirelessly repeats very simple language elements to the child? Leslie, all parts of the sentence are stressed. Tirelessly because she should never get bored. Repeats because we don't inform the child, we develop a skill which only comes by drilling. Very simple language elements because the baby's active vocabulary starts at 0 and it slowly builds up. The child understands the meaning from the context, so it should be the same language element in a given context, and variations may only widen the scope of fully consolidated elements. Question, another delicate balance for the bad mother, IGUs. Leslie, you are right, and it is between the too simple, broken, and the too complicated, abstract language. A good teacher uses the so-called Dolch words or sight words a great deal. These words make up approximately 75% of the English language. Because of their high frequency, students have to be able to recognize these words more easily and with less effort than all the other lexical items. In listening comprehension, the student have to be able to catch the individual words. At a later stage, in the speech work, the aim is to build them together into bigger blocks. A bad teacher imagines that the English language can be separated into individual words, and after learning these words, it can be built up again from them. Question: this page is so well explained that I have no further questions about the good teacher. Leslie, if we want to understand native speakers, we have to get used to shortenings, half-swallowed words, and natural collocations. They contain different sounds, and they also change the rhythm of the language. It is another good reason why we shouldn't teach contextualized, solo words. Such words have no fixed meaning, and that's why they invite translation. A good student can and will learn how to concentrate on the flow of the language, and through a lot of practice they will develop a very strong gist listening skill. It means that through a very complex psychological process, they will be able to go on if or when they don't as yet understand, get the gist, that is the main idea, and come back for the meaning to the original problem spot. A good student will be professional in negotiating for the meaning rather than getting the meaning as ready. A bad student learns isolate, decontextualized words, attaches to each an absolute-looking meaning, and is deeply hurt when the meaning is nowhere or different. Question: what is the flow of the language? Leslie, it is not what we call flow in psychology, as it is defined by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. It is a stage in language learning and language use when the structures of the language, including grammar, register, and social distance between the speakers, come effortlessly, as reflex acts, and we only have to give conscious thoughts to lexical items to get the message across. Question: how can we reach this stage? Leslie, by doing tons of easy drills, rather than learning a few difficult sentences. In the speech work, we always have to know who speaks to whom, where, when, and why. We don't speak well just by speaking a lot. We speak well if we listen a lot and speak enough. Question: what do you mean by negotiating for the meaning? Leslie, it is a dialogue technique, by raising a series of questions we get closer and closer to the meaning. It is used a lot in mathematics and it is called successive approximation. I can give you an example in mathematics, but it works in language as well. Q1, think of a number between 0 and 10. Have you got it? Answer 1, yes. Question 2, is it bigger than 5? Answer 2, yes. Question 3, is it bigger than 7? Answer 3, no. Question 4, is it smaller than 7? Answer 4, no. Question 5, is it 7? Answer 5, yes. Question: can you give a sentence whose meaning a rote learner, translator student would never get? Leslie: sure. There is no room to swing a cat. The rote learner or translator student would neatly write out the words, together with their translation, including room, thinking that it is the living room, or the dining room, then swing, thinking that it is a bodily movement or a dance, and then a cat, thinking about a feline animal. With all these, they would never get to the meaning, which is the place is too crowded. Question: does this topic have any special relevance for the Alpha Gen students? Leslie: yes, it is one of the most important concepts we have to understand if we want to help the Alpha Gen student. I teach LD students with some Alpha Gen students among them. They are typically very bad in long-term memorization, and they are unwilling or reluctant to do any drill work. When they learned their mother tongue, they had to listen and speak a lot, and all they know is the result of memorization. As the result of a joint intervention of the human environment and technology, in the form of different gadgets, they stopped memorizing, thinking that it is unnecessary since everything is there on the internet. It poses great problems in their schools, and I think it would be a great deal worse when they get to university. If we want to help them, we need to know that the memory is still there since it is genetically coded, and what is missing is the willingness to memorize. It works, but it only works if the family or human environment are ready to take an active part. A good mother uses a very wide voice range when talking to the child. The meaning of the message may take a long time to get through. What is more, the message may be ununderstandable or misunderstood. The part of the message that should never be misunderstandable is forwarded through the wide voice range and intonation for immediate effect. The message is many-sided: I love you, feel safe, I'm listening, you are great, you can make mistakes, no problem if it's wrong, we'll correct it, etc. A large part of the message goes through the intonation. Babies understand a lot even if they speak just a little. Question: why are melodies and voice ranges so important? Leslie, the baby doesn't understand words at the beginning of learning the mother tongue, but they recognize mother's voice and feel safe. Mother communicates love through her voice. Its opposite, a narrow voice range or a monotone, means aggression, and the baby feels less safe or afraid. By the way, it acts on adults almost the same way. For a long period of time, we had a high number of native English speaker teachers in my school. Soon after their arrival, I asked them how they feel and they always told me that they are fine, but they didn't understand why the local people are always angry. They felt it from one word, the way the locals said a hello in a monotone. For them, the native speakers of English, it was friendly in 1.5 to 2 octaves. Question: is there any special relevance of this topic to the Alpha Gen? Leslie: yes, there is, and it is very important. The baby's and then a child's job is to learn the mother tongue and as much of the world as possible 24/7 365 for the first 3 years of their life. The mother's job in the wake time of the baby and then the child in the first 3 years is to talk to them as much as possible and listen to them as much as possible. The baby then the child talks better if the human environment listen to them, listens better if the human environment talk to them. The child's job for 24/7 365 in the years 3 to 7 is to further learn the mother tongue with all its metalinguistic, paralinguistic, and extralinguistic features, the abstract concepts, like the number concept and the letter, sound correspondence they will need in school, and also reading and producing body language, social skills, another language they have to use with adults, including teachers to show social distance and empathy that can only be learnt in an empathic environment. If anybody, including the mother and other members of the baby's and the child's Humnan environment, or anything, including all the gadgets, interferes with the baby's and the child's basic needs, they will slow down or block their development. A bad mother doesn't talk to her child too much, thinking that the child isn't an intellectual partner we can talk to, or she talk to the child when giving information. Cool, straightforward information. Since 70% of the complex message goes through paralinguistic, metalinguistic and extralinguistic features of the language, if these are missing, and with them the affective and social context are missing, the comprehension of the child is delayed, as a result the whole complex language development is retarded. As a further consequence, many of those concepts of life importance that are rooted in the age range of 2 to 5 years, will be weak or missing. Question: why is the mother unable to communicate with the baby at the language level of the baby, or later with the child at the language level of the child? Leslie, it is not exactly at the level of the baby or the child. If you remember the quote from Goethe, it is the present level plus a manageable challenge. It is hard to tell why, because there might be different reasons behind this attitude. Anyway, it is based on a misconcept, either about the baby, or about the way a baby learns. That mother may look down on the baby as a person who doesn't understand anything and doesn't say anything. She may be waiting for the baby to start understanding something and start saying something. She can't see that the baby has a capacity to learn, but learning is an answer to an input. And the input must come from the mother. Question: what are paralinguistic features? Leslie, we have already mentioned paralinguistic features such as the tune, that is melody, the pitch, that is how high, the volume, that is how loud, the voice range, that is how many octaves, the pace, that is how fast, the word stress, that is which syllable is more important than others, and the sentence stress, that is which word is more important than others. Question: what are metalinguistic features? Leslie, when a baby, and later a child learn the mother tongue, they develop metalinguistic awareness, that is phonological awareness, that is becoming sensitive to sounds and combinations of sounds that make up words, orthographic awareness, that is becoming sensitive to letters and combinations of letters that make up words, and morphological awareness, that is becoming sensitive to structures that make up words, and are becoming sensitive to syntax, that is making sentences, for example. Questions: positive sentences or statements, negative sentences, short answers, etc. Question: what are extralinguistic features? Leslie, we have to make a distinction between extralinguistic features of learning and using a language, and extralinguistic knowledge. About 70% of all messages are expressed by extralinguistic features, such as body language, that is posture, the position of the body, gesture, the use of the hands and the arms to make the message more emotional, mime, using the face, the lips and the eyes, and gait, the way we walk. Extralinguistic knowledge is more we know about a certain word, expression, idea, or concept. For example, we know that fish lay eggies, but we also know that sharks are fish that don't lay eggies. Question: how does syntax come in? Lelsey, it is very slow and most importantly the child learns how to ask questions. By the age of 7, the child can learn all the basic syntactic forms. A good teacher starts the teaching of a new language, be it a foreign language or a second language, by teaching the sounds of the language, the streams of these sounds, that is words, and the streams of words, that is sentences or sentence fragments. Beyond the words, everything comes in the proper intonation profile with a wide voice range. A good teacher introduces the 4 main skills in a psychologically proper, natural order, that is listening comprehension, speaking, reading and writing. With this sort of teaching, the students will learn the music of the language before anything else. Most importantly, they won't be made to speak before listening enough. Question: why does the teacher need to start the teaching by teaching the sounds of the target language? Leslie, well, actually they don't didactically teach the sounds, but let the student learn them when the sounds are built into words and sentences, that is in context. Sounds are basic elements of language. How could the student learn words if the sounds, the basic elements words are built from, are alien? We don't learn a foreign language or a second language the same way as we learnt the mother tongue. There are a few similarities and many differences. Teachers don't teach the foreign language or the second language the same way the mother taught the mother tongue. There are a few similarities, and quite often huge differences. Question: what are the similarities? Leslie, the similarities come from the genetic code, coded into human genome, that is the listening or hearing capacity and the speaking capacity. Question: language books and language teachers call it listening skill and speaking skill. Leslie, it is wrong and it is misleading. These are capacities that only turn into skills with meaningful practice, intelligent drilling. Question: what is intelligent drilling? Leslie, practice in context and with a meaning, until it becomes second nature, a reflex act that is correct. Question: drilling is not trendy. Many coursebooks actually advise the teacher and the student not to drill. Lelsey, it is common practice with dire consequences. Question: what are the main differences that make learning the mother tongue effective, and learning a second language and foreign language a great deal less effective? Leslie, there are many, but here I want to mention the 2 most important differences. Number 1 is that the baby doesn't have another language to turn to, they have to understand and express everything in the mother tongue. As a result, the inner monologue is also in the mother tongue. In contrast, a typical foreign language class is based on translation. The key to understanding, as well as the proof of understanding, is translation. They don't realize that by translation you don't understand the target language better, you understand the message in the first language. The inner monologue will remain in the first language, and translation also kills the willingness to drill. By translation, the language we learn never becomes a reflex act, or second nature, and it will always require a conscious thought. Question: what is the second? Leslie, the for skills. Question: why do you use spec marks? Leslie, because they are not necessarily for, and they are most often not skills. The for skills mentioned in teacher training as listening, speaking, reading, writing, and this is the psychologically correct order. It means that we don't say anything we haven't listened to enough times, we don't read anything we haven't listened to and said enough times, and we don't write anything we haven't listened to, haven't said, and haven't read enough times. When we learn the mother tongue, 2 of the 4 the skills are out. We learn the mother tongue based 100% on the oracy skills, that is on listening and speaking. These are genetically coded as capacities in the human genome, and they can become skills only through practice. If anybody from the baby's or child's human environment, or anything, for example technology or gadgets, interferes with the practice time, they will not learn the mother tongue well enough to learn everything else through it later. When we teach English as a foreign language or a second language, all the further skills may play a role. The oracy skills, listening and speaking, are there because language is primarily speech, and that's why we call it tongue, rather than fingertips. If we do it well and avoid translation, it can be almost as effective as learning the mother tongue, and a total immersion course can be even closer to that. We can also learn the literacy skills, that is reading and writing, very effectively if we want to read what we have learned to recognize by listening and speech as a reflex act, and the inner monologue is in the target language, L2, and we only write whatever we can recognize in speech, and tell and read as a reflex act, as it is dictated by the inner monologue in L2. If we do it badly, we'll start with the impossible, that is reading and writing, and we'll never get to listening and speech. Question: what is behind this big difference? Leslie, on the positive side, the capacity for hearing and speaking is genetically coded in the human genome, which easily becomes skills with enough meaningful practice, and because of this, every healthy child has the chance to learn their mother tongue. In contrast, the capacity to read and to write is not coded genetically, neither in the human genome, nor in the parent's genes, nor even in the child's genes. The need for these capacities is culturally coded, and their fulfillment depends on whether the baby was born as a neuropositive or a neurodiverse human being, and also on whether the baby's brain has learnt to see from one-hand distance in downward direction, or not. Here, pedagogy must play a key role, and starting with the literacy skills leads nowhere. Because of this, in some countries, more than 25% of children are still functional illiterates after 7,000 hours of schooling, and the figure is growing with the arrival of the Alpha Gen kids. The difference is, really, like heaven and hell. Question: is there anything in the above that is especially relevant to members of the Alpha Gen? Lelsey: yes, there is. To have a clearer picture, we have to confront two different points of view: the opinion of demographers, who name people who were born between January 1st in 2010 and December 31st in 2025 the Alpha generation, and the opinion of parents, who would like to bring up their children born in the same period, and also teachers who are obliged to educate the children and teenagers born in the same period. The demographers label the babies, the children, and the teenagers as Alpha generation on the basis of the birth date, although the calendar doesn't create any special qualities for specialization. They say, based on the statistics they have created, that the brain of members of the Alpha generation is differently wired from earlier generations, and because of that they watch the screen 6 to 8 hours a day, push the buttons and touch the screen of gadgets for long hours, and sometimes non-stop, every day, play games for long hours at the expense of sleeping and learning, have problems in social intelligence and emotional intelligence, have problems in verbal communication and in memorization, etc. Demographers suggest that all these are normal symptoms of being the Alpha Gen. A lot of parents sense many of these symptoms and believe, influenced by the demographers, that the symptoms are caused by the different wiring of the brain, and as such, they are normal for the Alpha generation. Some other, more caring, parents are not influenced by the demographers, and they don't bring up their children under the influence of gadgets. I have to stress that the problem is not with the gadgets because they represent positive technological development. The problems are caused by parents who give the gadgets too early and without proper aims to babies and children. The uncaring parents, and the demographers who influence them, reverse the cause and effect. The cause is not the different wiring of the brain, miraculously changed by the calendar, which results in using the gadgets aimlessly at the expense of living the normal life of a baby and a child. The cause is the untimely and aimless use of gadgets, which results in all these symptoms. We, teachers, don't teach generations. We teach children and teenagers who show different symptoms that are very much away from symptoms of their parents and older siblings. These children look more lonely, they are less stable emotionally, they haven't learnt their mother tongue well enough to learn the world, and everything else through it, they haven't developed such basic abstract concepts and the number concept, which is the basis of arithmetics, mathematics, logical thinking, cause and effect relationships, critical thinking, etc. They often learn into the short-term memory, which results in difficulties of association. They lack the willingness to memorize what they have learnt, especially facts and figures. They have problems with the literacy skills, that is reading and writing. For example, many of them are functional illiterates after 7,000 hours of teaching, etc. The time bomb is ticking, and it is very urgent to find solutions to these problems. The first step towards this is the realization of responsibilities and starting to serve the real needs of our babies and children. We mustn't forget either that in 2025 the beta generation started, whose older siblings and influencers will be the alpha generation. Demographers say that, in spite of these alarming symptoms, the alpha generation have a bright future. It might be true, if they somehow survive schools and universities, and find a proper job. With proper help, they will. Without help, I doubt it. A bad teacher thinks that the language is made up of words, and teaching the language is merely teaching those words and the rules of grammar. Since solo words and grammar rules don't need any sort of intonation, this element can be left out. The same bad teacher usually uses translation as a teaching method. The sentences the student will keep the melody of the mother tongue. The same will be true for the word stress and sentence stress, and the natural rhythm of English is totally lost. The bad teacher has never heard of the schwa, and the pronunciation of a sentence is, for them, the pronunciation of the words in the sentence. Question: what is so wrong in teaching solo words? Leslie, there are several reasons for that. Let me name a few. Language is primarily speech, and we don't speak in words. We speak in chains of words. The chains are separated into solo words for the convenience of readers, writers, and printers. Language is also music, and solo words lack all the elements that make up music, such as melody, intonation, stress, rhythm, volume, and voice range. We use language for communication, and communication is related to meaning. Solo words have a strange relationship to meaning, and it is best expressed in Gestalt psychology. One of its basic laws is that the whole is different from the sum of the parts. If we apply it to language, it says that the meaning of the sentence is different from the meanings of the words in the sentence. In English, almost all words have multiple meanings. As an example, a very simple and common word geo has more than 80 meanings according to the visual thesaurus, depending on the context. It means that the context gives the word a meaning, rather than the other way round. Solo words invite translation. They invite translation a great deal more than sentences or texts. Some educational authorities, for example, don't accept coursebooks from British publishers if they don't contain word lists with translation of the words into the local language. I must add that translation as a teaching method was last modern at the age of dinosaurs. Question: what is the relevance of the schwa here? Leslie, it is another application of the Gestalt law here. The pronunciation of a sentence is different from the pronunciation of the words in the sentence. Another result of teaching solo words is that students will not understand the words as they are pronounced in a sentence, and every syllable with zero stress on it has a schwa, instead of the normal pronunciation of the vowel in it. A good student takes the first lessons as music lessons. Words may wait and can come later, but the sounds and the music are there from the start. A good student can and will imitate a great deal before any individual production. If they follow the music and listen attentively to the sounds, they will experience a very interesting auditory illusion. After a number of repetitions, the speaker, it feels, slows down and some key words begin to crystallize. These words will be more and more easily recognizable, and it is very difficult to imagine how it was possible not to hear them before. At this stage the AHA or eureka and a new insight with its catharsis are just round the corner. Question: how does it work in practice? Leslie, I send 100+ songs to potential students well before we start learning together. Their job is to listen to them as much as humanly possible to make friends with the sounds. If you cannot hear the sounds of a language, how would it be possible to hear the words that are made up of the sounds of the language? As a result, they come into the first lesson with the sounds of the target language in their ears. Question: what kind of song do you use? Leslie, I'm giving as example for English, but teachers of other languages may be able to find proper songs for the language they teach. Question: is there a special trick here for the members of the Alpha Gen? Leslie, no, the same principle will apply to their learning as well. A bad student is a real busybody. They have to write out all the words from the last lesson, have to put the mother tongue equivalent to all, have to learn the whole lot by heart for the big word test, have to learn the 3 forms of 30 irregular verbs nobody ever uses, have to translate my grandmother's second cousin put her bloody Swiss Army knife on the checkered tablecloth and 8 other useful sentences 10 times into the mother tongue, I commit brinkmanship. Which sentence is in present simple tense first person? Singular, into future perfect continuous passive negative interrogative third person plural. With all these important jobs prescribed, by the time they finish the last, they will not only be exhausted, but they will hate English and learning as well. Question: what is wrong with all these jobs? The student is dealing with English, anyway, aren't they? Leslie: I'm not absolutely sure they are in the noise all the way through. Question: what exactly do you understand by noise here? Leslie: most definitely not acoustic noise but intellectual noise. I cannot go into details here because it is a very complex issue. It is so complex that it deserves a separate book. Not just the noise but also the process of coming out of the noise, Bitter Honey, Bloom's Taxonomy, a second sequel to Good News for the Alpha Gen. Question: can you give an example or two about what you understand by noise? Leslie: sure. Generally speaking, everything that cannot ever be understood. You can learn noise, but you cannot understand noise. Why are the students forced to write out the words, or take them out of the context, where they have one meaning, and where they can be understood, into a word kist where they have either no meaning, or multiple meanings? Why are the students forced to rote learn the 3 forms of the irregular verbs? Why 3, and not more forms? What happens to the infinitive and the perfect infinitive, the gerund and the perfect gerund, the participle and the perfect participle? Why do they have to reflex condition the 3 forms together, although these 3 never come together? Why don't they have to reflex condition each of these forms with their time markers, from which they are inseparable? We know it very well that students can only be taught where they are. Why do so many teachers teach either well above the head of the students where they don't stand the ghost of a chance, or well below, where the students cannot listen, thinking that they know it all? The list is endless, and in the next book, we can learn how to come out of the noise and identify data, and then information as data in context, and then how and what we can do to make comprehension possible. We don't just avoid noise since it is very often inevitable. It is more important to learn how to get out of it. Here, we have to avoid the false definitions of knowledge, and understanding, and even learning. The fact that we get tired doesn't necessarily mean that we have worked. A good mother links the sounds of the language with a great deal of motoric, psychomotor movements. Through this multisensory experience the baby, and later the chills, learns everything with their whole body. If learning is everywhere, then memory is everywhere too, and that makes recall a great deal easier. Later, when the words combine into word pairs, and into full sentences, there are lots of possibilities for role play, and through the roles play both the social element and the language registers are easily learnt. We mustn't forget either that humor is one of the most important elements of playful learning and the child happily replays some elements with mates. Question: it is fine, and it was like that in my childhood, but it is very far away from many members of the Alpha Gen nowadays. Leslie: that is true, sadly very true. The main aim of this book is to make parents realize the negative influence of reduced human interaction if it happens before they learn the mother tongue, and the too much and growing influence of technology with the baby and the child if it comes too early and without a real aim. Question: it is not too easy to be a mother nowadays. Leslie: I think it has never been easy, but labor-saving devices at least partly compensate for the changes in family structure and for the financial pressures on families. Parents mustn't forget that bringing up a child, with teaching the mother tongue in its tsunra, is an investment, and mistakes committed in babyhood and early childhood will multiply the problems they have to face in teenage, in young adulthood, and actually all their life. A bad mother often creates a paradoxical situation she is with, that is near the baby or the child, as healthy babies and children normally do, moves. Paradoxically, this time the sounds of the language and the motoric, psychomotor movements can't be linked together into a multisensory experience because the bad mother doesn't talk to the baby or the child. She talks near them, over their heads, and it doesn't matter really whether she uses the mobile phone or talks to the neighbor. The baby or the child doesn't listen either. They can hear mother, but it is different from listening. Hearing is a faculty, while listening is a concerted activity. The baby, or the child, is left in he noise. Question: it is the noise, and probably the same noise you mentioned before. Leslie, you are right, and this kind of noise has a double negative effect. The baby and the child can hear the noise, but they don't listen to the noise on the one hand, and they do not speak either, since only intelligible speech can be repeated, but noise is not intelligible, and it doesn't matter really whether the noise or the silence comes from a human being, for example from the mother, or from a gadget. The result is a block in learning the mother tongue. A good teacher uses a great deal of total physical response, or TPR, as part of demonstrating the demonstrable elements of the language. It helps to link the sounds of the language to motoric, psychomotor movements. Whatever the students learn and store in their long-term memory can be easily recalled both through listening and through motoric movements. The good teacher's students have a higher than average vocabulary of verbs. TPR is there in all classes, but the class is not just TPR. When a method is pushed to its extreme, it moves to its opposite. It would result in misconception about syntax and a block towards more complex ideas. Question: how does TPR work in practice, and how commonly is it used in schools? Leslie, back in 1930, Harold E. Palmer, a professor of English at the University of Tokyo, Japan, wrote a book with the title English Through Actions. It shows elements which imitate the ways babies and children learn the mother tongue, that is, understanding verbal instructions and pictures, and acting upon them. The method uses 100% concrete verbal elements, which is a further similarity to learning the mother tongue. The method was little used in the babyhood of teaching English as a second or foreign language, and it was soon forgotten. It came to the surface again in the 1970s, with the name Total Physical Response, TPR, and it was relatively successful, mainly in teaching English as a second language, and somewhat less in teaching English as a foreign language. Methods come and go, and TPR also fell prey to new fashions. I use English Through Actions, and I prefer it Total Physical Response because it allows micromotor movements, for example during and drawing, and it also works online. A bad teacher doesn't use the TPR in air teaching because it is a waste of time, and we have to follow the syllabus as strictly as humanly possible. As a result, the students of the bad teacher will be both silent and paralytic. They will learn how to speak and how to behave in T language by sitting in silence. The bad teacher misses a great chance to help the students' understanding. It would be so easy for the students to listen to the verbal instructions and perform the motoric, psychomotor movements if they could hear them, or read the motoric, psychomotor movements of other students in the class and identify and understand the meaning of verbal instructions by them. Question: why don't teachers use TPR or English Through Actions if they are so effective? Leslie, I use English Through Actions and TPR both in teaching and in teacher training, and they are very popular with students and trainees alike. In teacher further training and retraining, I meet a lot of trainees who have never heard of these methods. It seems that neither English Through Actions nor TPR are in traditional teacher training, and you can't find exercises in coursebooks that provoke their use either. For the teaching of kindergarten kiddies, it seems to be the only method that really works and also solves the problem that kiddies need a lot of physical movement. A good mother uses a great deal of pictures and other visual aids, and she links the pictures with the sounds of the mother tongue. At the same time, she helps develop some very important concepts that are related to the text awareness, and more generally, to books and reading. The presence or absence of these concepts will determine later the child's relationship to literacy and reading and books, and ultimately to learning. The good mother lets the child use their fantasies and imagination and intuition. She never forces the child to see things in the way she herself sees them. She uses the visual aids to demonstrate the demonstrable elements of the language. Question: as far as I understand, text awareness should come well before the child is taught to read, or is forced to read. How does it work? Leslie, the capacities of reading and writing are not coded genetically in the human genome. They are not genetically coded but culturally coded, and they need a special kind of seeing from one hand distance and in the downward direction. Humans can't automatically see like that, the eyes can see like that, but the brain has to learn to decode figures like that. We look with the eyes, but we see with the brain. Question: when can the brain learn to see like that? Leslie: when the object is at one hand distance and in the downward direction, and it is when the baby is crawling in four-wheel drive. If that is missing, or it isn't long enough, the child will not be able to see in a way that is absolutely necessary for reading. For a developed text awareness, the child has to see texts well before they are taught to read. Text awareness is a kind of readiness. Question: how can we read this? Leslie: readiness is a combination of ability and willingness. In the red, we are not able and not willing. We are not ready. In the green, we are able and willing. We are ready. In the yellow, we are half ready, we are either willing but not able, or able but not willing. Now let's see them one by one. The baby is able to hear and is willing to listen to mother, especially if mother speaks to them. Listening will only become a skill with a lot of practice. The baby is able to give out sounds and is willing to do it, especially if the mother listens to them. Sounds will only become intelligible speech with a lot of practice. Text, that is reading and writing, is not in the life of the baby. The child is able to see the text if the mother reads out tales or stories loudly to them. Willingness comes and grows with the positive experience. If the child often sees the mother with a book, that is text in her hand, in a reading position and radiating her joy in her reading, they want the joy to themselves and are willing to do it. If the mother doesn't read out tales and stories loudly to the child, and they can't see mother with a book, that is text in her hand, and their first encounter with letters and a text is in a teaching and learning situation, and the child is neither able nor willing. In this case, the child needs a very good teacher to reach readiness that is a precondition to reading and writing. The reading and writing only become skills with a great deal of practice. Question: many children and teenagers don't like reading and they prefer texting to writing. This is the trend. What's wrong with this? Leslie: in my definition, teaching is giving input, and learning is memorizing as much of the input as possible. At this point, I have to ask back, how do they get the input? By listening? I doubt it, since many schools, and most universities don't represent the oral culture. By reading? I doubt it too, since they, as you said, don't like reading, and more of them can't read, or don't understand what they read. In many countries, functional illiteracy is up to 25% and still growing. Question: and what is wrong with texting? Leslie: texting is not writing. Texting is broken speech, frozen into letters of the alphabet. Texting is neither speech nor writing. Back to my questions: with a weak or missing reading and texting, that is valued neither by schools, nor by universities, nor by the workplace, how will they get into a secondary school that takes them to university entrance examination level? How will they successfully pass the entrance examinations? How will they get through university with a weak and neglected listening skill, a rejected memorizing habit, and disliked reading and writing tasks? We can't call them skills, because skills only come with practice. These are burning questions with no answers as yet. A bad mother typically puts the child before the television screen where the child is, again typically, contracted with visual aids. It is a terrible illness you can get by watching rubbishy commercials, or any other flickering visual input that empty your mind rather than filling it. The bad mother doesn't think that pictures in the child's picture book should be combined with the sounds of the language. With this, she reverses the saying, a picture can tell more than 1,000 words. In reality, a picture will take away the chances of telling 1,000 words. The two loud flickering movies and the silent pictures together will determine the child's relationship to literacy and to reading and to books, and ultimately to learning. Question: what's wrong with the television screen? It's a visual aid, isn't it? Leslie: I think you are wrong here. It is definitely visual, but it isn't necessarily an aid, because there are several problems with it. Most importantly, the pictures are not strictly related to the words. When babies learn the mother tongue, the visual aids make the words understandable. Very often, the words are not intelligible, just noises or voices that accompany the visuals. The baby or the kid either cannot learn them, or, if they do, they cannot use them since they are not situational. Another problem is that the producers of these videos change the pictures so quickly that neither thoughts, nor repetitions, nor critical thoughts would fit in between them. So the baby or the child doesn't learn, they are only entertained and get used to, and often get hooked on, the rapid changes of pictures. That is one of the reasons why kids don't like reading, it is too slow and boring for them. The real problem here is that they don't use anything useful, they only learn noise and sitting motionless. Question: mothers often use the video as a pacifier. Leslie, because of the above, the video is a very bad pacifier. A good teacher uses a great deal of visual aids as part of demonstrating the demonstrable elements of language. They know both the potential benefits of using visual aids or visual input, and the real dangers of overusing or misusing or abusing the visuals. When they realize that the student is a visual type, they would do everything to help the student develop very strong oracy skills, that is listening comprehension and speaking. For a while it may even be necessary to take away all or most of the visual input for the necessary skills to develop, because the visual type A of students typically listen with their eyes rather than with their ears. Language is speech to start with. Question: what is the delicate balance here? Leslie, visuals help to understand the words and messages, but we have to be able to understand and use the messages we have learnt without the visuals present. The visual is not the end. It is a means to an end, and the end is understanding messages. A bad teacher borrows the latest film from a videoteca and brings it to the class. He plays it and it is great success. The whole class sit back and watch the film attentively. The language is hard by all means, even for a native speaker of English. It doesn't matter really, since you can more or less follow the storyline through the visual. I say more or less because after the class the students don't really agree on the less obvious details of the story. If you assess the lesson quite objectively, the students haven't learned anything, or if they have, it is not learning from the language's point of view. The fact that both the teacher and the students enjoyed themselves will only prove that the teacher is a good entertainer. Question: why do teachers use films so often to replace teaching? Leslie, using films is a labor-saving device. They save labor both on the teachers and on the student's side. It is a lot easier to play a video than to teach something that fits the level of the students, that is the present level plus a manageable challenge, make it fully understandable and well practiced, and then test both the teaching and the learning. I guess that by using a film, all these elements would test negatively. The lesson and learning should be entertaining, but the main aim of the lesson is not entertaining the student. A good mother is a helper. She has no other language to translate the mother tongue to. Neither does the child. In this languageless environment, that is noise, the child needs a lot of time to create thoughts. Mother helps the child shorten the lag between her own thoughts and the newborn thoughts of the child. The child often reacts to the previous question or verbal instruction. Mother helps the child to react to questions or instructions more and more real time. The child is able to concentrate on the same subject only for a short period. Mother helps the child concentrate for a longer and longer period of time. The child needs a long incubation period for new concepts and vocabulary. Mother helps the child to shorten this period. Question: it is great surprise for me that the baby may answer the previous question or may act upon the previous instruction. Leslie, mothers need a great deal of empathy and empathic understanding to be patient, and patiently learning with the baby the child. The baby and the child need time for information processing and also to win over the inhibition before they can speak or act. We call this the incubation period. The mother's empathic understanding and the resulting patience help the baby and the child to shorten this period. It is very similar to developmental mistakes. We don't correct developmental mistakes. We patiently overcompensate them. A bad mother is not an effective helper. She is frustrated by not having another language to translate the mother tongue to. It is like that even if she herself doesn't have another language to depend on. Mother is not patient enough to give time for the child to create thoughts. Mother doesn't help the child shorten the lag between her own thoughts and the newborn thoughts of the child. Impatiently, she will misread the child's late but correct answer to the previous question as a bad answer to the question in hand. She will not help the child react to questions or instructions more and more real time, she will not help the child concentrate on the same object for a longer and longer period. Question: why is it like that? What can be behind it? Leslie, lack of empathy is the result of a too high ego. Babies are born with 100% ego. They think and feel that everything and everybody around them are there to serve their wants. As they develop, this ego shrinks and empathy develops in place of it. Babies and children can only learn empathy in an empathic environment. If the mother is egotistic, the child cannot develop into an empathic adult either. A good teacher doesn't translate the new language to the mother tongue. They don't translate from the mother tongue to the new language either. They know that translation is not a teaching method. They know that language is a bond, but they also know that the mother tongue is not a language in a foreign language or second language classroom. It is noise, and as such it must be avoided to start with, and must be made unnecessary at a later stage. The aim of the game is learning how to think in the new language, and it does not work through translation. The name of the game is building up the whole system of the new language as it is, rather than in contrast it with the mother tongue. The two systems don't mix well. Question: what is wrong with translation? Leslie, there is nothing wrong with translation. It is a high prestige and generally well-paid job that is very difficult to learn really well. Translation is a link between two languages we know equally well. Translation is not a teaching method. When teachers want to use translation as a teaching method, they misuse or abuse translation, and they do it because they don't want to teach, or can't teach. The fact that the student understands the translation doesn't mean that they understand the target language. A good teacher is a helper, and, for them, teaching is a helping profession. They have a great deal of empathic understanding for the student. They understand very well how difficult it is to survive in a languageless situation. They know that very often the student needs a lot of time to create thoughts. These thoughts will be very similar to a child's representational thoughts in a monolingual environment, that is, in an English-speaking zone. The helping teacher knows that the student's mind is very often busy with the previous question or verbal instruction and will welcome any late answer or reaction. They will help the student shorten the time lag and react to any verbal input more and more in real time. Question: what is a languageless situation? Leslie, it is a situation in which you shouldn't use the mother tongue anymore and you cannot use the target languages yet. Pictures, demonstration, and total physical response can help the student come out of this difficult situation, and Carl Rogers gives a very detailed description of the helping procs in his book on becoming a person. Helping is both an art and a science. Art and science here are like twin brothers, and art is the firstborn. A good teacher is a helper, and, for them, teaching is a helping profession. The student is able to concentrate on the same subject only for a relatively short period. The teacher helps the student concentrate for a longer and longer period of time. With a great deal of practice, the concentration curve will change its character from a sawtooth pattern, meaning very low efficiency, through microtooth pattern, to a floating sine W pattern with higher and higher level of efficiency. The student needs a very long incubation period for new concepts and new vocabulary. The teacher helps the student shorten this period. The helping techer does everything at an optimum speed to avoid translation. Question: can you show me a typical concentration curve? Leslie: okay. Here are the four main types. Leslie: this is where we start. A medium-high shoot-up is followed by a fast downfall and a relatively long sleeping time. The small territory below the curve shows that the work, that is the level of learning, is low and the memorization is negligible. The teaching must be based on dialogues to involve the student more, and we need a lot of drill work, closed tests, and matching type of exercises for higher concentration. Leslie: as the result of exercises mentioned above, the baseline goes much higher and the sleeping time is shorter. Because of this, the work, that is the learning and memorization, grows much higher. We must keep on doing the intensive speech work and make the background autonomous work more intensive, partly involving AI techniques. Leslie: the result is a medium bass, frequent micro-sawtooth pattern, with an almost negligible sleeping time. The amount of work is at a very high level, and with this we are very near to joyful learning and joyful tacking. The result is partly due to the fact that drilling is an instrument. When the incubation period is over, it results in a quantum leap. LC, this figure shows the optimum, a very quick shoot up, followed by a sine wave with very small ups and downs. When we reach this, it produces a flow with very high probability. I have taught members of all the generations of the 20th century, and also members of the Z generation, and the picture I have painted above was more or less true for them. However, there was a drastic change with the arrival of the Alpha generation, and the methods I have to use are very different. They normally come with a lot weaker knowledge of the mother tongue, and it results in a lower level of understanding. They also tend to learn, or rote learn, into the short-term memory, and it makes medium-term or long-term testing very different. Their willingness to drill study materials is very weak, and often it is nowhere, and it often makes the level of joyful learning and joyful testing more difficult to reach. These problems can be overbridged within a warm, welcoming, and accepting group and a very good personal contact between the students and the teacher. We also have to use the parents as helpers more often. The use of gadgets with proper aims, including the use of AI, can be great help. A bad teacher thinks that English is the translation of the mother tongue into English. Because of this, they translate English texts into the mother tongue for the student to understand. They also translate from the mother tongue into English. It is absolutely necessary for them to produce something in the target language. For them, translation is a teaching method. There are a few problems, though. Firstly, through the English to mother tongue translation, the student will not reach understanding. What they will understand is the translation. All in all, what they understand is what they did understand before the lesson. Secondly, if the student translates, the result will be a very poor quality text because they are influenced by English. Question: what is the most negative aspect of translation? Leslie, it keeps the inner monologue in L1, the mother tongue, although the inner monologue in L2, the target language, is quite easily the second most important skill, after the listening skill. It tells us what to say and how to say it, it sounds what we should read, and it dictates us what we should write. A bad teacher thinks that English is the translation of the mother tongue into English. Thirdly, when the student translates into English, the result will be, with very high probability, broken English. The student will be very deeply influenced by structures of the mother tongue. They have not learned anything independently from the mother tongue, so how could they operate in the target language without it? If we relate it to the Bloom's taxonomy, the student doesn't understand, that is, they are in the noise, and the teacher wants them to operate at the level of analysis. They would need to jump over the absolutely necessary levels of knowledge, but also the more basic levels of understanding. Question: tell me more, actually something, about the Bloom's 1 taxonomy. Leslie, it is a system that has been, and partly still is, the backbone of the American educational system, including teacher training. We tried to apply it to teaching English for speakers of other languages, TESOL, but we had to make some changes. There are several variations, and here I show you the two most common ones. Question: what are the main differences? Leslie, they renamed the lowest levels from a knowledge to remembering, and they also renamed the other levels that represent different levels of comprehension and understanding, respectively. Question: what is your most important problem with this system? Leslie, life and learning don't start with knowledge, and they don't start with remembering, either. They start with noise, or a blank mind, or lack of remembering. There are similar problems at the other levels. The extended Bloom's taxonomy, the system, this is how we call it after getting rid of 14 problems, is a very useful device in understanding and helping the student. I'm going to unfold it in the next book, the second sequel to Good News for the Alpha Gen. Question: how does it relate to translating to or from the mother tongue? Leslie, students need to translate because they don't understand, so the message is below the level of comprehension. Translation, however, is possible at the level of synthesis and analysis in the old system, or evaluating and analyzing in the new system. It proves the old, consolidated knowledge, that for a successful translation you have to understand the message. If you don't understand it, you cannot translate it. If you understand it, you don't need to translate it. Translating is a job. It is not a teaching method. A good mother loves her child and she also loves her mother tongue. Because of this, she acts as a very successful go-between for the two. She loves the mother tongue, which is, by the way, most often the mother tongue of the child too, but she doesn't love it at the expense of other languages. Because of this, she fills the home with different sounds, that is with the sounds of the mother tongue, as well as with the sounds of other languages. This environment will help the child keep many of the sounds that they were able both to hear and to produce as a baby. Without this environment, the child will lose these abilities and the sound repertoire will be very limited. Question: how does it work in practice? Leslie, I provide my students with tons of sound materials for their own individual, autonomous learning, and they will use part of it loudly and their human environment will hear it too. Question: why is it so important? Leslie, many members of earlier generations learnt to love reading by seeing their parents and older siblings with a book in hand, in a reading position, enjoying themselves through the reading. The younger ones wanted the joy for themselves too, and very often got it through reading. The same happens when the baby or the child can see the parent or the older sibling in a learning situation, listening to and repeating the materials they learn. If the learning and the teaching are joyful, it is possible to make the autonomous learning joyful too, and the younger ones read the joy and want it for themselves too. If the joy comes through listening and speaking, they will be ready to listen and speak to get the joy. Question: what sort of materials do you send to them? Leslie, besides the normal materials that are linked to certain lessons, I send them hundreds of songs and dozens of videos of different levels of difficulty. The easy ones are necessary for consolidation and use, and the more difficult ones for challenge and intensive ear training. I also teach them how to use AI for making different audio materials themselves. A good mother loves her child and she also loves her own body as well as her child's body. Because of this, she will be very careful about letting the body of the child develop in the best possible ways, both for the here and now and for the future. One example for this will be about an extremely important stage in the development of the child, and it is crawling, the infant's most important method of locomotion between 6 months and 18 months. Crawling is directly related to seeing and reading, the root of literacy. The good mother knows this and she doesn't take part in the whose child will walk first in the neighborhood competition. For her, the development of the child comes first. Question: is reading as important nowadays with the alpha generation as it used to be for earlier generations? Leslie, it is a very complex topic but, to cut it short, it is, I think, as important, if not more important than ever before. The literacy skills, that is reading and writing, are vitally important in schooling, for university studies, for enjoyment, for communication, for science, research and development, or research, development and dissemination. All these need a very special kind of learning. The brain has to be able to read and decode texts the eyes can see. Without this, the brain is at a loss, it cannot decode the message, and without understanding the message can be neither used meaningfully nor can it be enjoyed. Without understanding and enjoyment, that is without AHA, or eureka moments, we either cannot learn it at all, or we shall learn it into the short-term memory, which doesn't make it possible to associate the present learning with earlier or later bits of learning, and that association is the very basis of research, development and dissemination. Question: nowadays, many kids and teenagers don't like reading. Leslie, it is, probably, because they have never reached the level and proficiency in their reading when they can enjoy what they are doing. Question: many of them say that reading is too boring for them. Leslie, it is the result of watching certain types of videos at a very early age where the pictures are changed so fast, at an almost neurotic speed, that the speed give time neither for the picture itself, nor for backward association to earlier experiences, nor for forward association as guided imagery or fantasies. Shortly, this kind of videos empty the mind rather than fill it. The kids get used to this fast speed which makes the speed of reading too slow and boring, and SLSO to the thoughtlessness that makes thinking, that is provoked by the reading, too tiring. Question: they don't generally like writing either. They prefer texting, the modern equivalent of writing. Leslie, wait a minute, texting is not writing at all. The fact that they use letters in texting doesn't make texting equivalent to writing. Texting is broken and muted speech that is frozen into letters. It is here and now communication that strictly relates to the situation and to the participants. The fact that somebody texts a lot doesn't mean that they can write at all. Question: it seems that the literacy skills, reading and writing, are both in danger. Lelsey: I'm afraid that you are right here, and without them our culture is in danger. Gadgets, especially AI, can write texts if properly prompted by humans, and can read texts out loud. Booty T cannot think in the way learned humans can. A good mother loves her child and she also loves herself, and her favorite pastime is reading. The child can often see her with a book in her hand. Mother is doing something she really enjoys. The child is cut IOUs and they want this joy for themselves, too. Being with mother is good, but being with a happily reading mother is even better. From glimpses, the child slowly realizes that there are pictures in the book, that there is something else, text, in the book, that there are lines in the text, that mother moves her hand on the lines when she reads, that she moves from left to right on these lines, that she also moves from the top towards the bottom, that she turns the page sometimes. Question: do mothers still read in the way that is pictured above? Leslie: sorry to say, it is more and more rare, although it would be absolutely necessary for the baby and the child's harmonic development to be hooked on reading and oral, linked to oral communication. It is partly the result of a different family structure and lifestyle, but we mustn't forget either that many adults, and among them many mothers, belong to the Y or Z generations, and many of them are also affected by technology and gadgets. Their time is partly taken away by the gadgets and from the baby or the child. The results are alarming: lower level in learning the mother tongue, less conversation and more silence in the family, but also in the classroom, higher and growing level of functional illiteracy, more common rote learning and more common learning for grades, less and different contact with nature, lower emotional intelligence, lower social intelligence, lower level of empathy, and more common loneliness, just to name a few. Reading, in itself, if we do it well, is joy, and the replacement of writing with texting and other uses of gadgets are most definitely inferior to reading. I definitely don't read solely for the ideas of the author, I most often read for my own ideas, induced by the author. It is almost like a conversation with the author who may have died hundreds or thousands of years ago. It is a deeper and more long-standing experience than, for example, watching a video where everything is ready and we can lean back and watch it. It is especially important for members of the Alpha Gen because they generally haven't learnt their mother tongue well enough. The child also realizes that many things disappear when we turn the page, but we can go back if we want to, that there are many colors on the page, that some of the colors are happy and some others are dull or even frightening, that there are words in the lines, that some of the words are long and others are short, that some of the short words come back again and again, that there are letters in the words, that some of the letters are big and others are small, that some of the letters int he. Short words come back so many times that they're good friends, that these friendly letters sound the same when mother reads loudly. Oh, no. These letters may sound different at times. It is getting more and more interesting. Question: what else can we add about reading? Leslie: not too much, since the most important ideas are already said. Maybe that this sort of, almost idealized, reading is something that most busy, modern mothers also should learn, not just, and before their kids. It seems that the Gutenberg galaxy is really over, and we have to be very careful what we are going to replace it by. School, and especially universities, are not ready for such a drastic change that is based on anything but reading, and teacher training is lagging even more behind. It is especially important for members of the Alpha Gen because they generally haven't learnt their mother tongue well enough. A bad mother doesn't really like reading, but she will buy the latest picture book and she gives it to the child. She is angry when the child tries off a page or two, or if the child wants to eat it. She takes it away then because the child is not clever enough to play with books. Maybe in a year or two. Anyway, it is the school's job, and it is the teacher's job to teach the child to read. This child is so small. They should eat and sleep and play. Times fly so fast, and very shortly the hard and boring school years will come. Anyway, there are so many TV channels nowadays with so good cartoons in them. It's really hard to choose. It is great help that the child has quickly learned to use the remote controller. Question: most probably the child in the story above is a visual type. Leslie: it is possible, but then the mother's type is not really easy to define. A visual type really means that the person is okay in handling the visual input. It doesn't mean that they should be fed by visual input. And it often really means that the person is weak in handling the auditory input. So it really means that the person should be fed by auditory input for their development. The mother here is wrong in offering a charming video because the charming video most often doesn't contain associable pictures because the pictures come too fast for any sort of association, and it doesn't contain imitable sounds either because the voices are most often unintelligible in themselves, even for the inner voice. It is especially important for members of the Alpha Gen because they generally haven't learnt their mother tongue well enough. A good teacher helps the student develop a very high level of texture awareness. They know very well that the usual prerequisite skills for literacy are phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, vocabulary development, alphabetic principle, and print knowledge. They also know that before these important skills the foreign language teacher and the second language teacher have other important jobs to attend to, namely, they have to fill the classroom with the sound of the new language, they have to help the student fill three at home with these sounds. Question: it is clear, but what is the difference between phonological awareness and phonemic awareness? Leslie: phonological awareness is a very complex affair, including the detection and manipulation of the sound structure of words. Phonemic awareness is a subset of phonological awareness and it only deals with detecting and manipulating SPRCH sounds, not alphabetic letters. The knowledge of both is absolutely necessary for the successful teaching of reading. It is especially important for members of the Alpha Gen because they generally haven't learnt their mother tongue well enough. The good teacher will fill the classroom with the sounds of the new language. They will help the student fill their home with these sounds. The good teacher will help the student widen the range of the sounds they can discriminate by hearing. They will help the student widen the range of the sounds they can produce in recognizable quality. The good teacher will fill the classroom with the typical tunes of the new language. They will help the student fill their home with the same tunes. Question: how can you fill the classroom and the home with the typical tunes of the target language? Leslie: we concentrate on it in the teaching and learning and in any sorts of speech work, but there are special materials for widening the voice range, e.g., songs, rhymes, and a special series of CDs called jazz chants. It is many students' favorite, and it adds a great deal of humor to the lesson and to autonomous learning. It is great joy and it is a great catharsis when we can hear students use 2 octaves for their hello, instead the usual monolone. It is especially important for members of the Alpha Gen because they generally haven't learnt their mother tongue well enough. A good teacher will help the student develop a growing sensitivity to the sounds and tunes. The good teacher will help the student widen the range of the tunes they can discriminate for speech intent. They will help the student widen the range of the tunes they can produce with recognizable speech intent. After all these, it is high time the class turned to developing the prerequisite skills. Question: how can we help the student develop a growing sensitivity to the sounds and tunes in T language? Leslie: we work a lot on phonics, and the students learn it very fast and willingly through phonic games. First, we do it as part of the teaching and learning, and after that I send it to their home for autonomous learning. Question: what kind of tunes do the students learn to discriminate by listening? Leslie: most importantly, we learn the tunes of positive sentences, questions, short answers, lists, and tag questions. It is especially important for members of the Alpha Gen because they generally haven't learnt their mother tongue well enough. A bad teacher doesn't teach the student. They teach the language. When they went to university, they went there because they loved the language. They didn't go to university because they love people and students, and nobody asked them whether they do or not. Neither at the entrance, nor at the exit, nor at any other point in between. Their training, too, was all about the language, especially the subject called Theorematic Approach to the Theory of Theories. They were also learning linguistics, and in 5 semesters they had to learn everything about morphemes, and syntagmata, and graphemes, and phonemes. All these seem to be purely theoretical. Question: what is wrong with theories? Leslie: nothing is wrong with theories. The question is whether teaching is a science or an art. If it is a science, theories may come first. If it is an art, we need successful, person-centered practice. We still need science to understand the successful practice better and to learn from it and develop it further. We do not perform the practice according to scientific theories. It is the other way round. Successful practice will prove some of the theories. All these seem to be purely theoretical, and nobody ever mentioned that practical and applicable knowledge of this field might have anything to do with anybody's language learning success. It is more like a series of cliffhanger, the ideal meeting point where the irresistible force can meet the unmovable object. By the way, the parallel is not perfect because a good half of students dropped out in the process. The other half, who stayed on, were warned many times not to mix in practical examples or their own experiences because it will lead to an automatic fail since they are nobodies. They must quote the big names even if they have not taught a class for the past 30 years. Question: I feel that this point is especially important. Leslie, you are right here. Bad or mistaken teacher training is the root of all educational evil, and the good selection of the teacher-type trainees and good training is the solution to all the educational world's problems. The example above really happened some years ago, and we can call it the archetype of bad training. Shortly, not appreciating the trainee's own example is a mistake, but punishing or threatening the trainee with punishment for their own examples is a sin. It is an especially serious problem in an MA course that must be based on the BA course, on the teaching practice, and on the critical thinking gained in both. All in all, it must be very difficult to face a class if you have been made to believe that you are a nobody. The class are people and you have not been trained to teach people. The final balance is very bad. 95% of what you have learned cannot be used in the classroom. 95% of what you need in the classroom was not taught at all. Based on HEAD training, you cannot distinguish the object of the teaching, that is the language exponent you want to teach, and the subject of the learning, that is the student. The lines above might be food for thought for analyzing the reasons why public education in Hungary is the very last among all European nations. It cannot be otherwise. Question: how does it work with the Alpha Gen? Leslie, if teaching the subject instead of the student doesn't work in traditional classes, it will be deadly in attempts to teach members of the Alpha Gen. They don't know their mother tongue well enough, and it will make comprehension very difficult, both in learning a foreign or second language and in learning anything in the mother tongue. It means that the student will spend most of their time in noise. If the teacher is not trained to teach the student, they will know nothing about bringing the student out of the noise. A good mother airs positive messages to the child, both about herself and about the child. The message is not about being satisfied either with herself or with the child. It is more about accepting her present best and the present best of the child as good starting points for further development. The expression of satisfaction would be felt as final, and as such, it would stop the development. Accepting the present best as the starting point and aiming at a higher level of development together will boost the development. A stagnant mother cannot make the child develop. Only a developing mother will be a good enough role model for the child to develop towards their full human potentials. Question: how can this apply to the Alpha Gen? Leslie, it is a very difficult situation. Question: why? What makes it so difficult? Leslie, the fact that the symptoms are, at least partly, caused by the mother. We are talking about a student who shows the typical symptoms of spending 6 to 8 hours a day with gadgets, whose long-term memory has shrunk to minimal, who is quite reluctant or unwilling to memorize, whose social intelligence, emotional intelligence and empathy are far from highly developed, and who often feels lonely. The mother first has to recognize the problem, then has to see her role in causing the problem, has to learn a way out of the problem, and has to work a great deal to help the child develop out of the problem. A bad mother makes either of two grave mistakes. One extreme is to be always satisfied with the child, thinking to herself and also suggesting to others that her child is the best simply by being her child. The best, we know, needs no further development. The other extreme is to be dissatisfied with the child, thinking to herself and also suggesting to others that her child is somehow inferior. Nothing is ever good enough. Mistakes are not seen as inevitable developmental steps. They are seen more as sins. Everyone needs sincere appreciation. Sinker appreciation, with both words stressed. For this child, the appreciation is either insincere or painfully missing. Question: it is very bad. Can it be any worse for the Alpha generation kid? Leslie E. Most definitely, yes. If the mother and other members of the kid's human environment give the gadget to the child before the age of 3, that is before they learnt the mother tongue well enough to learn everything else through it, and without a good reason and proper aim to do so, the kid will develop different features of child behavior and development that are not very well tolerated by the school and the teachers in the school, and the lower level of appreciation acts both upon the kid and the parents. Here the mother has to face a real catch-22. If she appreciates the bad grades, she is damned because she appreciates something that is bad. If she doesn't accept and criticizes the bad grades, she is damned too because partly she caused them. A good teacher never gives negative messages to the student. Since this is a negative message, I'll try again. A good teacher always gives positive messages, simply because they know it very well that repetitive messages from important persons act like self-fulfilling prophecies. Positive messages generally have a Pygmalion effect, while negative messages almost always have a give a dog a bad name effect. A good teacher can always rephrase a message to sound positive, to show forward, and to affect positively. For a good teacher, failure is a postponed success. A mistake is a chance to learn. They analyze today's success to be able to repeat it tomorrow. They also analyze failure to be able to avoid it next time. Question: I understand a Pygmalion effect when they tell you you can so many times, enough times that you believe you can, and you can. But what is a give a dog a bad name effect? Leslie, imagine that you buy a little dog, a puppy, and you immediately write on the garden gate the bevar of the vicious dog, in big letters. Writ large. The dog will sooner or later, rather sooner than later, will bite somebody. Not because of what it is like, but because of how people behave, having read the writing on the gate. It is more or less the opposite of the Pygmalion effect. If you tell somebody enough times that they are bad, or behave with them as if they were bad, the person will believe it, and as the result of sales-fulfilling prophecy, they will perform worse and worse. Question: do these have any relevance to the Alpha generation? Leslie: yes, and it is related to gadgets. Before you would think that I may be over against gadgets, I have to stress that gadgets are neither good nor bad, but they can be used well or badly. Question: so the good or bad uses give the two variations. What do these cause? Leslie: everything depends on the timing, on the existing or missing reasons and aims for using the gadgets, as well as on the adequate or inadequate level of learning the mother tongue. If the gadget is given to the child only after the age of about 3 years, and there are good reasons and clear aims behind giving it to them, and the child knows the mother tongue well enough to learn everything else through it, there is a chance for positive synergy within nurture, that is between the human environment, including the mother and the family, and technology or gadgets. It means that the child can learn better with the gadget than without it. If, however, the gadget is given to the child before the age of about 3, or there are no good reasons and clear aims behind giving it to them, or the child doesn't know the mother tongue well enough to learn everything else through it, there is a chance for negative synergy within nurture, that is between the human environment, including the mother and the family, and technology or gadgets. It means that the child can learn worse with the gadget than without it. It is also clear that the positive criteria are cumulative, that is, we need to meet them all for positive synergy, but the negative criteria are selective, that is, if any one of the 3 criteria is missing, the synergy will be negative. A bad teacher often gives negative messages. For them, nothing is ever good enough. Mistakes are more like sins, and a student who makes them is a sinner. They also employ a tactic called attributory egotism, and as a result, if you know it well, I'm a very good teacher. If you don't know it well, you're good for nothing, but I'm still a very good teacher. Everyone needs sincere appreciation. The student of the bad teacher doesn't get sincere appreciation since the success is owned by the teacher while the failure stigmatizes the student. With this, the teacher violates one important law that is worded in the 6-category intervention analysis: read failures with a positive intent and an effort behind them as positive. Question: it is very interesting to compare teaching the mother tongue by the mother and teaching anything in the mother tongue by the teacher. Leslie: they are so different that any comparison will be full of question marks. Mother is an untrained amateur who is learning the job on the job, and who is fueled by motherly love and the success of the baby and the child. The baby is an untrained amateur who may become more and more professional with proper guidance and who is fueled by the pressures of survival. The teacher is by definition a trained and paid professional, but here come the first few question marks. Were they selected for training by being a teacher type, or just by the grades they accumulated over the years? Were they trained to teach people, or to teach subjects? Are they allowed to follow their role model teacher, or they have to follow the big mains up in the ivory tower they have never seen successfully teaching anything to anybody? Do they enjoy the freedom to teach, and provide their students the freedom to learn, or they have to follow the rhythm and pace of dogmatic teaching of the stereotypic class? Are they allowed to teach the student where they are, rather than where they should be if they were robots? Were they trained to make warm, welcoming and accepting groups out of a group of individuals, or they still believe that herding them into the same container is all they can do? Were they trained to see teaching as a helping profession, or they still imagine that teaching is mainly giving information? Question: these are questions that are not only generally unanswered, but sadly they are unasked as well. It seems that the job of the teacher that is positively described above is very close, or at least within hearing distance to what the mother does, but its opposite, also described above as a counterpoint, is not on the same continent. No wonder why these two important agents have to learn each other before they understand each other and act upon each other. What is attributory egotism? Leslie, it is a term often used in sociology to describe lack of empathy. It is when I understand myself, or my favored agent, on the basis of talent or unfavorable circumstances, and the other, disfavored agent by lack of talent or favorable circumstances. It goes something like this: am I successful? Of course I am. What else could I be with so much talent? Is he successful? Of course he is. What else could he be within so good circumstances? Have I failed? Of course I have. It was inevitable within so bad circumstances. Has he failed? Of course he has. It was natural with so little talent. Question: what is six-category intervention analysis? Leslie, it is a branch of humanistic psychology defined and worked out by John Heron, a British psychologist. It is a very complex system and the space here is not enough to go into details. We use it a great deal in teacher training. Question: is it relevant for the Alpha Gen? Leslie, yes, most definitely. It shows how we can intervene positively, supportively, or how an intervention may become degenerate, that is if we do harm to the other without knowing it, or perverted, that is if know that our intervention is harmful and we still do it. This is exactly what may happen to members of the Alpha Gen. A good mother is an attentive listener. She listens to give chances to the child. She also watches the child attentively to read the gestures of the child. These gestures will tell a great deal well before the child can speak, and the successful reading of these gestures will help the child in the development of speech. It is a sort of reverse total physical response. In TPR, the child translates the mother's verbal instructions to bodily movements and performs the physical act. Here the child makes gestures that have a speech intent behind them, and the mother, having read the gestures successfully, verbalizes what the child wanted to say. The two together will make the language development a cooperative act. Question: how does it affect the Alpha Gen? Leslie, it can be positive or negative or anything in between. If the baby and then the child learn the mother tongue really well, it will give them self-confidence because of the positive feedback from their human environment. If, however, the mother gives the gadget to the child too early, say at the age of 1, the child will not learn the mother tongue well enough, the feedback of the human environment will be negative, and it may even silence the child. There is also a chance for extra risk here, if the mother can give the gadget to the child as early as that to liberate herself and have time to ride her hobby horse, the first year of the baby, and then the child might not have been as attentive as it should be. We listen better if people speak to us, and speak better if people listen to us, and it is especially true in the first years of life. A bad mother is not an attentive listener, simply because she thinks that there is not too much, or nothing to listen to. For exactly the same reason, she doesn't watch the child attentively for gestures. She is either unaware how important functions gestures have in communication before the use of words and while learning words, or is unable to read these gestures and verbalize these gestures. She doesn't give her time either for the total physical response while she Showulf gives verbal stimuli for the child, or for the reverse TPR where she should read the gestures and verbalize what she reads, or the stage in speech development where the child produces meaningless sounds before meaningful sounds. Question: how does it relate to the Alpha Gen? Leslie, when we teach them, we may realize that members of the Alpha Gen who haven't learnt their mother tongue well enough are generally also quite weak at reading others' body language, and also equally weak at producing their own. If the period of 1 to 3 years in the life of the child is affected by the gadget, there is a high chance that the period of 3 to 7 is also lost. This is the period in life when the child should learn NAR of the mother tongue, should learn to read and produce body language, develop their social intelligence and emotional intelligence, and become more emphatic by giving up some of their egotism. A good teacher is an attentive listener. They listen to the student to give chances, or not to take away chances. They know it very well that the more attentively they listen to the student, the more easily the student will speak. They also know that they can listen a great deal better if the teacher speaks to them, person to person. For that end, they have to teach the student how to speak person to person, rather than person to paper or person to the wall or the ceiling. They will also vary the different listening styles and intents. Sometimes it is just listening, and some other time it can be analytic listening. On special occasions, it might even be credulous listening, in which they only give free attention, without pointing to who is right in a debate. Question: is it very different for the Alpha Gen? Leslie, with less knowledge of the mother tongue and a less developed comprehension skill, it would be imperative for members of the Alpha Gen to learn in a dialogue mode so as to catch up and not to be left more behind. Sadly, the dialogue mode is very rarely offered by teachers, probably because they didn't learn like that, and their teacher training didn't enlighten them to teach like that either. The dialogue makes the students more active, atomizes the knowledge, gives room for negotiating for the meaning, and makes it easier to memorize. It also allows questions, and through the questions, and the answers that follow, the students may more easily become the proud owners of the resulting knowledge. A bad teacher is not an attentive listener. They don't listen to the student to give chances, or not to take away chances. For that, they speak too well. They speak so well, and they are so much in love with their voice, that the student has no chance to speak at all. If the student doesn't speak, there is no need to listen. The fact that the teacher speaks well and most of the time doesn't mean that the student's listening comprehension is at a high level. The teacher's speech is more like a lullaby and a sort of seductive overteach. It is so beautiful that we don't need to bother with the meaning. All in all, the teacher doesn't listen and the student doesn't speak. They practice what they know. The student practices sitting. Question: how does it affect the Alpha Gen? Leslie, if the child gets the gadget, which is typically a mobile phone, too early, the gadget doesn't speak, and the child doesn't have to listen. They just push buttons, touch screens, and wait for something to happen. But nothing happens that is planned by the parent and is understandable to the child. Question: how does the child react to this or nothing? Leslie, they keep pushing and touching since they have read it from the parents or the alpha siblings' body language and their reactions that this kind of pushing and touching is enjoyable and they want that joy for themselves. If they do it enough and long enough, they will develop a kind of FOMO, which is a Sartong dependency. Question: what is FOMO? Leslie, it is a mosaic word that reads fright of missing out. It is more and more common for kids, teenagers, and also for adults. Fright, here, is a noun that describes a psychological state, is a preposition that links it to its object, a gerund, a verbal that expresses a strong feeling about the serious consequence of an imagined action, missing, of looks like another preposition, but it is really a particle because it has no object. So the fright is real, but its consequence is only imagined and the two together causes a very strong dependency. Question: can you help me manifest FOMO as a dependency? Leslie: okay. I'm walking the street and a man is coming towards me with a mobile phone in his hand. It is very difficult to avoid him. I step aside, but that is little help because the man bumos into a lamppost that doesn't step aside. I'm sitting on the underground train and, as usual, I entertain myself by watching people. The train stops and people get on. There are 2 empty seats in front of me and 2 teenagers, a pretty girl and a handsome boy, sit down there. Both have mobile phones in their hands and are very busy texting. It takes only 2 or 3 stops to realize that they are talking to each other. I remember that it is very different to touch a girl's hand from touching a screen. In schools, it is very difficult to take away the mobile from kids, and when they have to leave it at reception, the best part of their mind is locked up there too. In many families, mother, father, and the kids sit and push the buttons or touch the screens instead of exchanging the news of the day. It is total madness, and I wonder why they call themselves a family. You get on a bus or train and look round. 18 out of 20 people push the buttons or touch the screens of their mobiles. That is massive FOMO all round, and it used to be people reading or talking to each other. Question: it is clear now. I can see similar scenes every day and everywhere. Before we finish, may I have a rather personal question? Lelsey: sure, go ahead. Question: with all this insight, what is your relationship with gadgets and, more generally, with technology? Leslie: there is nothing wrong with gadgets, and even less with technology. They are unbelievably clever pieces of development, and they have changed the lives of nearly everybody. The problem is not with knowledge, because it is fine. The problem is with the lack of wisdom in using our knowledge. I have a long history in using the personal computer in my own learning and also in teaching and teacher training. It may sound unbelievable, but back in 1983 my brother Lois and I were invited to a scientific and educational conference in Rome, Italy, with 100 participants, 98 English people and 2 Hungarians. The topic was computers in teaching English for speakers of other languages. By computer, please understand a Commodore 64 then. It means that the capacity of the computer was 64 kilobits. In contrast, a mobile today has 5 gigabits or more. At the conference we presented a program that could be used for multiple choice tests, where the language material was printed on paper and the computer could do the decoding and assessment. As the technology developed, we always went with the development, and we experienced that the development meant profit and loss at the same time from the educational point of view. A new system invited new programs and made the old, but educationally perfect, programs obsolete at the same time. A new computer sold new programs, and the new programs needed new computers. I've been using computers in teaching and teacher training ever since they existed and were available for schools. Many X generation and even Y generation trainees were first quite reluctant to use the computer, fearing that they can ruin the program, or even the machine. This is the evolution of fear from FOM to FOMO, that is from fear on messing, into fear of missing out. The grandparents experienced fear by using the gadget, and now, only 2 generations later, the grandchildren experience fear if they have to stop using the gadget for any reason, for any length of time. I have been using the gadget for teaching and teacher training for all generations of the 20th century and now for the Alpha Gen in the 21st. I also use AI for enriching the repertoire of helping pedagogy for the LD students and for members of the Alpha Gen. All in all, I'm very enthusiastic about using gadgets in teaching and in learning because they can take part in a positive synergy, but I'm very much against misusing and abusing gadgets because they create FOMO and take part in negative synergy. I do hope that this book will help readers understand the difference between the two. Before we finish, I would like to point to an attempt to get rid of yet another myth that was invented and distributed by some of the demographers who deal with the Alpha Gen, and it is the suggestion that members of the Alpha generation are unique in multitasking. As far as we can learn it from history, humans have always been multitasking ever since hunting, fishing, and gathering individuals and societies, and probably the best example that proves this is the mother who has to do umpteen jobs parallelly or simultaneously, quite independently from the age she has lived in. Since our topic is related to the use of gadgets, we can limit our focus and comparison to 3 generations, the Millennials, the Gen Z, and the Alpha Gen. The Millennials had the chance to learn their mother tongue very well before they got in touch with the gadget. It is also true for the body language, social intelligence, emotional intelligence, and empathy. It is a nurture versus nature game, and here the mother was typically present. The Gens also had the chance to learn their mother tongue very well enough to learn everything else through it, but their mother and other members of their human environment were more affected by the gadget, and it made a mark on their language learning efficiency. The same is true for body language, social intelligence, emotional intelligence, and empathy. It is a nurture versus nature game, and here the mother was mostly present. The Alpha Gen had a great deal lower chances to learn their mother tongue because most of them got in touch with the gadget well before they could do anything meaningful with it, and much before the parents and other members of their human environment could give a proper aim and a good reason for giving it to them. Because of this, they went to school with a huge deficit in knowing the mother tongue and in learning anything else through it, including body language, social intelligence, emotional intelligence, and empathy. It is a nurture versus nature game, and here the mother was often sadly missing. Normally, there is a delicate balance between nurture and nature, but if nurture pulls back, nature takes over and it has the last word. Okay, but what is multitasking? It is performing more than one task at a time. Demographers mention it as a unique and very positive attribute that is owned by the Alpha Gen. The millennials mention multitasking as a person's most positive achievement or characteristic feature. Okay, but what is a task? In the demographer's definition, any activity that people do parallel to or simultaneously with the main activity. What are the tasks in multitasking, as defined by demographers? Searching the internet, texting, using YouTube, mobile phoning, learning in a class or with a tutor, taking part in lectures, doing homework, using the Facebook, chatting, using AI, searching a dictionary, Wikipedia, and so on. What is your definition of tasks and multitasking? A task is an activity that is very closely related to the main activity. Outside this relationship, they are in a wants and needs relationship that compete with each other. Outside this relationship, they are more urges than tasks. How can you call it if it is not multitasking? Code mixing or code switching or task switching? What are these and what is the difference? Code mixing is used in Pidgin English and in all mixed languages like Hunglish or Japlish. It is also applied by teachers who cannot explain English grammar or vocabulary in English and they turn back to the mother tongue. Code switching is used by bilinguals who switch between the two languages they use. Task switching is used in competitive jobs, where people have to boost brain power, in which people cannot focus on one job and are forced to switch between two or more. It means that people have to switch back and forth between tasks. Is this last one necessarily positive? Not at all. One task is put on hold while the other is completed, and for students who are less professional with technology, swithing is a task in itself. Because of this, there is a decline which is due to the psychological refractory period, which is very similar to the incubation period that is very common in learning. The switch acts as a bottleneck. Multitasking has the greatest effect on the cognitive resources because we have to fill the gaps that built up while we were away. The harder the academic task, the higher the price we have to pay for being away to do something else, especially if the memory is shorter than necessary. Can we see the effects of multitasking or multitasking generation by generation? The millennials didn't use multitasking in their school years or at university because technology was strictly banned out of the classroom and lecture halls. However, in 2003, lecturers at Stanford University allowed students to take laptops into the lecture hall. They realized that multitasking is unnecessary if the extra tasks are related to the main topic and must be banned out of the room if they are unrelated. Multitasking is more detrimental than helping if the lecture contains the extra tasks of the manageable challenge. At a certain stage, a laptop is unwelcome in the classroom or in the lecture hall. Multitasking made the life of millennials busier because they were not yet professional in handling the technology. For millennials, shifting from one task to another is a task in itself. When the working memory is running short, millennials tend to give up the extra tasks and keep the necessary tasks. The Gen Z use both multitasking and demultitasking a great deal. For Gen Z, multitasking gives a strong feeling that the extra tasks make life easier. College students often multitask when being engaged in academic work and autonomous learning. Gen Z students tend to give up the necessary tasks more often and keep the extras. For the Gen Z, the shift is automatic and doesn't need replanning. In the USA and in Europe, multitasking affected the academic performance of Gen Z students negatively. The Alpha Gen use multitasking with proper help by teachers and other members of their human environment, but even more the multitasking on their own and with mates. For the Alpha Gen, extra tasks are easy because they are professional in them, but learning is more difficult because of the less professional level of reading. The Alpha Gen are not yet at university, but won't multitasking inhibit academic performance when they get there? More than 1/4 of their internet time is spent with multitasking, and more than half of their time for reading is really multitasking. Students often send and receive messages during lessons or lectures. Why do students multitask? Do they know it all? Is it the way to catch up if they lag behind? Is the lesson or session unnecessary? Should they learn at a different level where the message is both understandable and manageable? Does the teacher or lecturer teach below the level of the students? Is there something as understanding the message too well? Is there a chance that students don't understand the message at all and multitask in panic to catch up? Have the teachers learnt the students before they attempt to teach them? Have the lecturers learnt enough about the students to assess the proper level to address them? Is there a chance for seductive overteach? Is there a chance for oppressive overteach? These questions are valid because some young people think that multitasking helps them in learning and in doing homework assignments, and also because many students overestimate their capacities of learning successfully with multitasking. Multitasking may help students to be informed about the unnecessary tasks but blocks the learning of the necessary tasks. Multitasking may help in filling the short-term memory but keeps the long-term memory untouched. Multitasking takes away the attention from the necessary content and concepts. Students need to learn how to feed the long-term memory because that is tested at university. If the teacher teaches at a too high level for the students, they may create an extra task for the students, that is searching for the basis to put the new knowledge on. Proficiency in reading may help compensate for the loss created by multitasking. These are questions we have to ask and answer, and these are factors we have to be prepared for well before the Alpha Gen get to final exams and then to university. A very important note, in the materials above, I did not want to tell you how to feel and what to think. Instead, I was simply sharing with you some of the insights, ideas, and skills that have accumulated over the years and decades. If you have read this material, and agreed with me at some points, it doesn't necessarily mean that I am right. We both may be wrong. By the same token, if you didn't agree with me at some other points, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm wrong. We both might be right. I've been right or wrong so many times that I reserve the right to be wrong. Thank you for your attention.